My relationship with Brian, we went to school together. We were at a boarding school here on the Gold Coast back in the 70s, and I've known Brian since he was about 15 years old. We played rugby together. We were great mates at school, and you know, the interesting thing is, in my industry, I'm in the life insurance business fundamentally, and Brian and I would play golf together often. We'd socialise a lot, and on a number of occasions I'd sort of raised with Brian, knowing that he had 4 kids and a wife that he cares very much for. And I'd spoken to Brian about whether he had adequate life insurance. And of course, it's tough talking to your friends about these sorts of things. And whenever I'd raise the issue, he'd sort of fob it off a bit and say, oh, you know, come on, let's go and play golf or something, and we'll talk about it later. And it was hard for me because we had such a great friendship to kind of push the issue. You know, if it was with, you know, another client who I didn't really know that well, you know, I never really found it difficult to ask people whether they were adequately covered or not. But with Brian, as with any close friend, sometimes they're the hardest ones to broach the topic with. So in reality, what happened with Brian was he kind of won. You know, I'd ask him, and he'd managed to put me off, and he always won that conversation. Brian had a very successful career over in the States and various places around the world. After Brian had taken some time off here, he was putting together a business here based in Australia, and that wasn't as successful as he'd hoped for. So he went into partnership with some guys from the UK and New York, and they were looking at putting together a business based effectively in Asia. And Brian was really the key person in regard to the whole business relationship, in regard to getting the right people together, to getting the investment funds and so on. And they were probably a couple of weeks away from floating the company in Asia, which would have really guaranteed Brian and his family and children's financial security. And then I got a phone call from Emma, and I can still picture where I was when it happened. And it was interesting, you know, and now I see it in slow motion. That morning before I'd left home, I'd seen on the news there'd been a plane crash in Thailand. And I think with all the bad news that's always on TV, you kind of see things and you gloss over it. And and I remember Emma's phone call. She said, Mark, it's, you know, I rang her and she said, you know, a plane crash this morning. And my mind flashed to what I'd seen on the news, and she just said the words Brian was on it. And you know, I knew what it meant. My mate of all those years was suddenly gone. When I got the phone call and I raced back to see the family, you know, it became obvious that it just made no sense whatsoever for Emma to have to go over to Thailand, where Brian's body was, to pick him up and bring him home. So I volunteered to do that. I didn't want her to have to get on a plane. I mean, in a case like that where the husband's overseas and has been killed, you know, the last thing you'd want is for Emma to have to jump on an aeroplane, go overseas and land at the place where her husband had been killed in that tragic accident. So I volunteered to go over there and to deal with the authorities, I guess, when I got there, and wait around to have to pick him up and bring him home when they finally released his body. It was one of the toughest things that I've ever done, but it's what I wanted to do for my mate. Bring him home. Sadly, by Brian not paying attention and me not forcing him to sit down and go through the process that I would have liked to have done with him in regard to his planning, what it's done, it's basically left Emma and the kids in a situation where fundamentally in 4 or 5 years they will just run out of money. You know, the sad thing is, had we sat down and done some planning for Brian and put adequate insurance in place for him, Emma could have led a nice lifestyle and been adequately taken care of, and sadly we just didn't get to that point with them. Yeah, there is a very simple message in this, and I'd like to start by telling a little story, and that is, you know, when I sat there in the chapel at the funeral, and I sat beside Emma because she needed the comfort, and I sat beside Emma, and there was the 4 children there, and it's a very sad event, and you know, the whole time, no matter what was happening in the service and the emotion of the whole thing. My lesson out of it all was that I'd failed, that I'd let my mate down and I'd let his family down. And you know, we have the power with what we do to make things better financially for people, and it's the greatest lesson that you can learn, and learn it from me. You know, make sure the people that you care for, starting with yourself, sit down and think about your own family, but everybody that you care for in life, make sure that you've had the conversation and you don't let them say they don't want to talk about that topic. Sit them down and say, you know, this is something we need to talk about, plan properly, and make sure that those that you care for and those that you love are properly prepared for financially if something should happen to you.